It's the last example of the whole course. Can you feel it? Are you excited? I am, that's for sure. Okay, so we're looking at our last example and we just are asked to sketch the graph. Okay, so again, I'll always look at the denominator to try and figure out a little bit about my graph before I actually start plotting it. If I can predict things, then I can spot where my mistakes might be. So it's a quadratic because I've got two binomials multiplying, which would give me an x squared term. So even though I don't see x squared explicitly shown, it's there. It's just hiding in factored form. Okay. What's nice about factored form is that it tells me what my non-permissible values are going to be because it tells me my zeros at positive and negative 1. I also know that it's opening downward, which means overall what this is going to look like is my parabola would have been doing something like that. So my reciprocal is going to look something like the previous one, actually. But just to make sure, I'm going to test my non-permissible values. Negative x minus 1, x plus 1 equals 0. Remember that 0 multiplying property where if it's multiplying to equal 0, one of the pieces has to be 0. So we've got x minus 1 equals 0, or, and actually it shouldn't be, it should be that it can't equal 0. X plus 1 cannot equal 0. So x cannot be positive 1, and x cannot be negative 1. Lovely. Non-permissible values. Check. Table of values. Next step. And again, I want to surround these asymptotes. So I'm going to go negative 3, negative 2, 0, 2, and 3. And I'm going to get some symmetry over here. And again, I can plug in. So 1 over negative 3 minus 1, negative 3 plus 1. So it's negative 4 times negative 2 is positive 8, but there's a negative out in front here. So it's negative 1/8. 2, I'm going to do the same job. So negative 3 times negative 1 is going to be positive 3, but that negative out in front of the denominator means that it's overall going to be negative 1/3. 0 going in here is going to give me negative 1 plus 1, so it's negative 1. But then there's that negative out front, changing my sign again, so it's actually just going to be positive 1. And then I get my symmetry. And again, feel free to always double check if you don't believe me that it's symmetrical. I won't be offended. I promise. Okay, so similar scenario, we've got above and below the x-axis, so I'm going to stick it somewhere in the middle. Horizontally, I've got two symmetrical vertical asymptotes, so I'm going to put my vertical axis in the middle as well. It's going to look something like that, x and y. I'm going to have to go up to positive 3, so, and negative 3 on my x-axis. So again, I'm just going to go by halves. But vertically, I got lots of room again, so I'm going to go up by eighths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2. What that allows me to do is I know where that 1/8 now is, so I can kind of define that point. I'm going to sketch in red again. Start with my asymptotes. X is negative 1 and x is also positive 1. And of course, my horizontal asymptote of y equals 0. From here, it's plotting points and knowing that this one would go upwards again. You are more than welcome to check some other values in there. They're fractions, so I recommend using a calculator. over here, we've got negative a third would be 0.3. So this is where doing it by eighths maybe wasn't my best idea ever. Okay, I do know that those points are clearly defined. And a third, well, would be roughly just over 3. I'm going to put here. Yeah, that gives me my general shape outside. And there we go. Again, got my graph done. Check, check, check. Okay, so when we are going to graph any of these reciprocal functions, I do strongly recommend going back to the original function to predict, but making a table of values is never a bad idea. So you got some practice questions, do those, go in the workbook, do those, make sure that we've mastered this, because this is probably one of the more complex ideas, and it does show up again in grade 12, and specifically that ability to graph a reciprocal really quickly, be able to pick out asymptotes, etc. So we definitely want to have a pretty good handle on it before we continue on to grade 12 pre-cal. But otherwise, you're done the course. Congratulations. How excited are you to study for your exam? Okay, good luck. If you have questions, make sure you're asking.